All right. So this roundtable is basically going to be focusing on digital identity. I come from a company called Okta. We work with both workforce identity and also customer identity. Been 3 years with Auth0, and that focus on customer identity, CIAM. I've got a few slides just to set the scene, and then of course Tessa will be moderating it, and then just basically have a discussion on, of course, the topic of balancing security and UX. But first of all, the login box, which is basically authentication. A lot of seen as a necessary evil. You provide credentials, get an artifact, and then you can have access to a really cool API. And some might think that it's quite simple. Any sort of program that can interact with an API, even with or without a user, need a login box. But it doesn't have to be simple, and it isn't actually simple. There's a lot behind it. So of course there's your standard flows, forgot password, reset passwords, but there's a lot of other things to consider. It can be, for example, if a user wants to use more than one identity, if they want to use Facebook or Google, if it's a B2B use case, how do they bring their own identity? Can they even access your service if they can't use their own identity, corporate identity? Authorization, giving the right people the right level of access. Data residency, GDPR, data privacy, these type of things. Something like integrations. How do we get data to and from other third-party systems that could have interest in this data? SLA and scalability. So a lot of things go into this login box, if we can put it as basic as that. And mistakes can be costly. Pretty much any company is a digital company or a technology company nowadays. More and more companies, you see it maybe with COVID, have really excelled this digital transformation. And with that also comes the need for identity. And like I said, doing it can be difficult. It can be not just costly in the sense of if there's breaches, but it can also be costly in the sense of losing the trust of your customers, losing potential conversions, revenue, these type of things. And if we think of identity, I think a lot of companies initially thought identity, okay, well, this was workforce. It's your employees, least privileged access. The main risk is this kind of security aspect, and user experience wasn't really considered. It's more just security at any means necessary. User experience, well, it just has to be the way it is. Because that was, the workforce, they had to access these services in order to do their job. For consumer identity, it's different. For a lot of services or a lot of products, there are alternatives. So if the user experience isn't there, if the trust isn't there, if the security isn't there, even a customer might just go somewhere else. And that's definitely something to consider. Security, very, very important. But with the lack of user experience or negative user experience can have equally as bad implications. Just some examples. This is an old example, but what's a bit strange is a lot of the identity, especially towards customers haven't changed a lot. You will still see this in a lot of examples. There's this airline in Scandinavia, without saying too much, that I essentially stopped using their loyalty program because I forgot my login credentials. I had to create a new service and a new identity, and I couldn't connect these. And I ended up, not prioritizing that airline because essentially I wasn't getting the points. And that's the problem with these login examples. From one point of view, the password that I mentioned, that I showed before, you can even improve just something as basic aspects here by in real time showing, okay, how do these passwords actually adhere to some of the policies that the developers have created. On the left side, you can see there's the interface for the developer. They can very easily just decide what level of security they want. And on the right side, you can see what actually user is experiencing. Breach passwords, we hear about it a lot. A large majority of the credential stuffing attacks, of course, breach passwords. There are many, many databases. And on the dark web, as an example here, you can see they have over 6 billion records just made available.
So there is a question of what pain point is being addressed by the product. So this is something you already went through. So what would you answer to this question? What is the pain point addressed by the product?
Well, I mean, identity. There's one possibility where companies build their own identity solution. They hire developers, they hire identity experts, they build, maintain, and develop a solution. The issues with that concept is that as the identity requirements develop, whether it's B2C or B2B, you have to spend many resources developing the solution. It can be costly. There's not a lot of identity experts out there. A lot of developers, I think, would prefer to build the cool business critical applications, not build identity. It's not the most sexy thing to build and maintain. And there's the security aspects. As you can see, there's a lot of breaches. I think 83% of the 6 billion logins per month on the Auth0 platform is suspicious. So there's constantly attacks happening, and a company building their own identity solution have to be on top of this all the time. Development. Let's say login with Apple ID. When that came out a couple of years ago, Auth0 already had it in beta within 10 days. I would not want to know how long it would take for a developer to try to do that on top of all their other responsibilities. So this concept of outsource the things to experts instead of doing it yourself. Keep the question coming.
Yeah, there is another questions about best practices for managing IoT device identities. So IoTs, they do have identities as well, and should have identities, so to say.
Yeah.
What's your insight on that one?
So with IoTs, IoT aspects, I think it's just as important as with normal user-based authentication to use standards-based security. And then use granular permissions to control, the internal and external clients' access levels. At Auth0, we use the client credential grant from OAuth2. So something like that, I think. I don't know if there's others that have done something differently. Or maybe the person who asked the question has some experiences.
Yeah, there is best practices only. So I guess the person who sent the question is interested on the topic about IoT device and also identities, best practices. So, but it obviously it looks like that this issue is not only, you know, a person, a user who is using the identities, but also the devices. And I guess, I don't know if you have the same insight that the identities should be managed a similar way than, you know, traditional users when it comes to devices.
I think they should. You know, there's a lot of aspects that are important. The whole security piece, of course, as our smart devices, as they get into our homes. I've got an alarm system right here that I can control via an app, and I log in there as well. I mean, a lot of devices now can have identities, and I think where we're getting to, at least where we're seeing the future is, we've gone into a kind of passwordless presence, you know, using biometrics and getting away from passwords, which inherently aren't very secure, to moving into a loginless future, where based on different factors, are it can be our treadmill that I have in my garage. It can be different aspects that just know us and interact with us, but in a secure way based on certain contextual factors. So you should definitely see the IoT space as equally important when it comes to identities and be secured in the right way. But again, think of the user experience as well. Of course, a device can't really feel user experience, but the same mentality should be there. Moving on from this breach password aspect, I think a good operator of an online service should take advantage of these databases of the breach passwords that we talked about. At the moment, we have a third-party solutions like Auth0 will have these type. I think ours is something like 7 or 8 billion breach credentials, and the operators of the service should actually take advantage of this and also maintain a database or use the corresponding APIs to test against these databases during the user registration and login. One should be, of course, that you don't have breach credentials entering your service, but at the same time, from the user perspective, it could also increase the trust in your service by them seeing, okay, you're actually aware of this, you're actually aware of my credentials have been breached, and thank you for notifying me. You don't need to block me, but like you can see here, sending me an email prompting me to change my password. So you're, the whole point of balancing end user security with user experience is important. We talk about the same with adaptive MFA. Only prompt MFA if you're either seeing it from impossible travel. So if I log in Helsinki at 9:30 or 11:30, and then I log in from Ho Chi Minh City at 12, that's impossible travel. If it's a new device, if it's from IPs that we already know, constantly think about this balance of UX and security, because both are equally important. And it shouldn't be given that there has to be a trade-off. That doesn't have to be a trade-off. You don't have to have UX at the cost of security and vice versa.
Yeah, there is an interesting question regarding this topic. So if we think about that companies still have a lot of legacy applications, which means that many of the breaches have already been happening. So there is a question that what are the main challenges when there are legacy applications involved with the API?
Whoops, sorry.
Yeah.
Why did that just happen? Sorry about that. Sorry, the question.
Yeah, the first question was that what are the main challenges when there are legacy applications involved with the API? And then we have additional nice questions there, but I will ask it afterwards.
Okay, so with legacy applications and I guess hybrid environments, what we tend to do there, at least from our side, is through the AD connector, which is then able to sync identities with cloud ones. So you need to connect these kind of on-prem legacy applications with the cloud database, with the cloud identity service. There are the different players on the market that do this differently. We are inherently cloud native. I know there's a couple of other services that are from the on-prem world. From our side, we can connect to on-prem applications, but our service is in the cloud, and I think that's also where you're moving to. So we can help with this digital transformation, but it needs to be from the developer side and a strategy going from on-prem to the cloud if you want to go there.
Yeah. Then there is another question which is about the process of registration and the registration flow. So the question is that how do you argue on the necessity of higher security, e.g. MFA, when your product manager is convinced with 1 minute registration workflow to minimize the churn? This is quite good business related question, I believe. Thank you, Gabor.
No, this is perfect. So what we advocate for is this kind of, you want the consumer usually, or the customer wants to get from A to B as quickly as possible. So if we take the classic registration and login flow, the classic registration is you click, create an account, you have 30 questions. What was your wife's maiden name? What's your dog's name? What's your address? All these things, all this data. And we've actually seen that 35% of users, if they're asked too much information, they lose the trust. It's the number one reason for losing trust at this point, if you ask too many questions. And 83% of the 17,000 consumers and IT people we asked have actually abandoned a cart based on this aspect of this more issues with the registration and login. So we advocate for that just to get into a service or registering, use passwordless, use social, but then you can base it on scopes or other aspects where you then prompt another factor, or you add security when they want to access billing information, or if they want to buy something, or different aspects where you then prompt if you get into a more sensitive part of the service, or having to access more confidential information, then you prompt a second factor. But one big thing that has changed is this kind of WebAuthn, the biometrics, because essentially users are used to using their fingerprint or their Face ID, and that's, I was going to say perfect, but nothing in this world is perfect. But it's a very good balance between security and UX, because it's very quick to get in, but it's also highly secure because it's very difficult to hack or steal. So we advocate for this one-click registrations, and then using risk scores or adaptive MFA or biometrics to balance security and UX. So there's different ways of doing it, but that's the thing with the flexibility. It's up to the customer or the business to decide what do they want to do.
Yeah. we have 3 minutes left. So would there be any key takeaways what you would like to provide for all of the listeners here?
I think I kind of went through it, but consider identity as being strategic, because there's a lot more behind identity than just credentials and a user database. You can get a lot of it from first-hand data. You can increase your brand or improve your brand just from something as simple as login and registration. First-hand data can give you a better insight into the user, personalize their experience, make them feel like the business you work for actually knows the customer. There's a lot you can do with identity, and security is important. Of course, it's very important, but there's a lot more to it than just security. We're seeing it with a lot of customers that if they see identity as being strategic and connected to their strategy, then there's a lot of value for it.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would love to continue the discussions offline. You have my contact details, I suppose, or Apidays have it. So I would love to discuss anything, whether it's API best practices or IoT best practices.
Yeah, and that's really great, because I think that the strategical point of view that you actually mentioned, so that's the first steps to start top to down.
Yeah, exactly. The top to down, but then also remember that the application builders, the developers, these guys and girls are at the forefront of the business now. So if they build very cool applications with a good identity solution at hand, then it definitely has business impact. And just this top down is important, bottom up is equally as important.
Yeah. Well, thank you everyone for joining, and thank you, David, so much for your presentation. And sorry for technical difficulties in the first set, but
it all worked out.
It all worked out. Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Yes.